And it's a prevalence which is estimated the season level, but it's close to 6.6%. 6.6%, that's the mean actually. Yeah. And the max we got close to 40%.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears of dairy producers. I'm Reagan Bluel from the University of Missouri Dairy Team, and our guest today is Dr. Eric Paquet from the Université Laval, Quebec, Canada, and his student Felix Huot. Recently on the news, it's really been focused around record-breaking heat waves for many locations across the United States. So, of course, through July, heat stress has been on the minds of many dairy producers. And you know that there's several facets of the dairy cow that's impacted by heat stress. In the last 2 months, we've really zoomed in and featured the mammary gland changes, but this month we're going to focus in on the rumen. And subacute ruminal acidosis it's a condition that might be playing a part in some of the seasonal milk drop and composition changes that you're seeing in your herd. But SARA is really challenging to measure. So Dr. Paquet and his team of researchers look not only at the summer months, but throughout the year to try to find diagnostic tools for producers to identify SARA in their herd. And this recently published article in the Journal of Dairy Science is titled Predicting Subacute Ruminal Acidosis from Milk, Mid-Infrared Estimated Fatty Acids, and Machine Learning on Canadian Commercial Dairy Herds. So welcome, guys, to the Dairy Science Digest. And before we really get kicked off, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, for sure. Thank you very much for the invitation and giving us the opportunity actually to talk about our work. That's really appreciated. So I'm Eric Paquet from Laval University. I'm a professor here in the animal science department. I think one important thing is that might explain like the accent you hear. It's a French Canadian accent. So, and my background for this important work was I'm more a computer scientist. That's my background actually, and specialization in the machine learning and data science and computer science.
Good deal.
Felix is more knowledgeable about the dairy part, but that's...
Hi, thank you for having us today. It's very a nice experience for us. So my name is Felix. I'm an agronomist and also a PhD student here at Laval University. And during my thesis, we're working on developing new tools to try to help producers by using machine learning and milk analysis.
Fantastic. And so you guys are merging biology, physiology that's happening inside the dairy cow with computer learning and trying to really understand how can we make this combination be tangible for the dairy herd across the world. And before we get started, I know subacute ruminal acidosis might be familiar to many listeners, but some might not know much about it. Could you start the conversation off with just a little background information about what SARA is and how's it typically monitored?
Just how you've said it, SARA is a common nutritional disorder and is defined by a low ruminal pH. So when the cow has low ruminal pH for a long period of time or repeated episodes of low ruminal pH, we can call it SARA. And it comes with a lot of potential consequences, such as milk fat depression, diminished feed deficiency, decreased fiber digestibility, and a lot of health problems such as inflammation, reduced body condition score. So we can go on and go on. There's a lot of things that SARA may cause on dairy cows. But the problem with that disorder is that it's very difficult to monitor on commercial farms, since the only real way to diagnose SARA is by measuring ruminal pH. And as you may know, in the commercial farms, we cannot access the rumen to measure that ruminal pH.
Right.
So that's why we wanted to try to develop new tools to monitor that disorder.
Yeah, kind of developing tools for a non-invasive way to see what's going on in the rumen. So that was kind of the idea of the project. So just, is there a way to say, to know actually what's going on in the rumen just from a milk sample? So we had some preliminary results that were indicating that would be possible, but we had to validate it on a commercial farm because that has been shown in a couple of research herds that this could be done. But the idea here was to say, well, could we do it in a commercial setting?
That sure would be nice. I mean, by the definition of the word, subacute means that you can't see it. You can't, it's very challenging to wrap your hands around it. So a lot of times as we're touring around farms, if there's some issues, we look at rumination. quantifying how much rumination is happening. That can kind of be a loose correlation. But this subacute ruminal acidosis might be holding your herd back. So let's listen in a little bit. In years past, there was a bolus produced that would help us identify what the ruminal pH was. Could you describe that a little bit and how your team used that in this research?
Yeah, that's actually that's part of the idea was to just be able to monitor what's going on in the rumen like in real time. So like you mentioned, there is this bolus which is available, kind of costly, I would say, because I mean if you want to run like a study on multiple animals, the costs increase really fast. But so we're not expecting that producers would just buy this thing and just using like every day. So that's why I mean this research project was like interested to study like what's going on precisely in the rumen. So this bolus we inserted in the rumen and it goes in the reticulum. Okay, it's just one part of the rumen. So and then what this bolus is doing, it's really a tiny piece of equipment, technologies packed in a bolus, which is really interesting. Is just providing a lot of information every 10 minutes. So it's like it's inside the cows, but there's an antenna and it is just sending data out of the cows to like a nearby antenna. And every 10 minutes, we have a readout of what's going on in the rumen. And the kind of information you get is like temperature in the rumen, the activity, the pH. So for like, you can get information about the pH for around, between 50 days and 150 days. I think that the precision of the tool decreases a little bit, but for at least 50 days, you know what's going on in the rumen. And we use this data actually to monitor carefully what's going on in the rumen and in the pH. And this is kind of the information we use to detect actually SARA. So if we have the pH is lower than a certain threshold for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, what is that pH?
The pH, I mean, there's several definition of SARA, but one I would say is kind of like globally accepted is the pH is lower than 6.0 for more than 300 minutes for a day. So we can call this a day as a SARA positive day. So actually we suspect that there is SARA. So because it's always indirect, we don't know exactly, but if we strictly focusing on pH, this is how we define SARA.
Very good.
In this study, we were monitoring 67 cows that have been followed for over
150 days.
For 150 days, for which we have information about everything's going on in the rumen. And it was on 7 commercial farms here in Quebec.
I think this is a really important detail to dive into. Those 7 herds, they're enrolled in the Dairy Herd Improvement monthly milk sampling. And so how did you utilize those milk samples to validate or quantify SARA prevalence in the herd?
We used those DHI samples, but we increased the frequency. So we had access to a milk sample every 14 days. So we had about 2 samples per month for each cows. And in Quebec now, there's Lactanet, which is the DHI lab, official lab for the commercial farms here, that are estimating milk fatty acid profile from the FTIR analysis. So what we did is that we took milk samples of those cows that had bolus for the study and sent those milk samples to Lactanet for the milk fatty acid estimation.
That fatty acid is estimated because there's no direct quantification of fatty acids. Because if you want to really do that, you need another machine, and the cost to get the information is a bit higher. So it's a cost-effective way to get fatty acid estimations, but it's not available like everywhere. Lactanet has done this work where actually they're using some machine learning tools, we can say this. So you can apply the machine learning tools on the information you get from the machine, and then you get an estimation of the fatty acids by calibrating carefully. I mean, with 1 milk sample, then you need to calibrate your machine so in this study, we just decided to use the fatty acids estimation that we obtained from the DHI to estimate if a cow has SARA or not. We get from 1 milk sample, FTIR, it just means that we're getting like 1,000 data points. You take a milk sample, you analyze it, and us, because we love data, 1,000 data points for just 1 milk sample.
That's
And this is the
exciting.
spectral, actually. I don't want to say
But
it's
it's
a
infrared spectroscopy, so we could summarize it, I think, as mid-infrared spectroscopy, right?
Yeah, it's made as well as a spectroscopy, but it's not a special machine. It's like all DHI service are using this machine to just analyze milk sample. It's just that we're using this information to just actually predict SARA. So that's more or less the idea. For sure, GC, it's not only costly, it takes forever, right? It's really
Oh,
not.
yeah.
Because that's cost-effective way. For sure, you don't get the precise quantification of fatty acids. So this we know, but the estimation is globally not so bad. So this is what we're using.
Sure. And to replace the very costly GC assessment. Okay, so tell me, why would fatty acid profiles change when SARA happens? Let's kind of dive into the biochemistry of what changes are occurring in the rumen to cause that change in fatty acid shift.
When the cow has SARA, it means that she has low ruminal pH, and that may affect ruminal environment. And if the ruminal environment is affected, microbes will be also affected, microbes in the rumen. And that will affect also how the cow will treat the dietary fatty acid that she will eat. And those fatty acids that will come through the rumen, they have to go through a process called biohydrogenation. So because the cow will eat unsaturated fatty acid, and those are toxic for rumen microbes. So they have to pass them to a process called biohydrogenation to transform them to saturated fatty acid. But this process will be affected in low ruminal pH, and that will in turn it will affect the fatty acid that are then will exit the rumen and then taken by the mammary gland. So that will lead to changes in the milk fatty acid profile.
If I could add something about this story, is that because prior to this project, we've done we have a colleague which is a co-corresponding author on this work with me, Rachel Gervais, which is a professor here at Laval University.
Yes.
And Rachel, she's really an expert in fatty acids. So and she has done a preliminary project in a research herd where actually they were inducing SARA with a special diet. And she's an expert, and she has access to this fancy machine which is producing a really accurate measurement of fatty acids. And she developed some equations. I was not using machine learning, but she was able to just provide some preliminary results that it is indeed possible to detect SARA from fatty acids in a research setting with an induced form of SARA. So that's kind of I think that's something interesting to keep in mind. The SARA, which is the induced form of SARA, which is seen done in a research herd, it's really not the SARA you get in a commercial farm, because nobody can do SARA on a farm. So I think that's one interesting thing about this story, is that we're really looking at what's the SARA we see in the commercial settings. But so bottom line, that was the preliminary work that led to this work, because our colleague just showed that it is indeed possible there is some signal there, but we wanted to validate it in a commercial settings.
Yeah, and the challenges were that when we're going to commercial settings, we have just a little amount of milk fatty acid that we can get. And then we have this thing about the SARA that we have, and the different susceptibility between cows. And we saw a lot of variability among cows, among farms in the rumen PHO.
Yeah, there is a prior publication where we just survey actually the heterogeneity of the pH, and it's quite impressive. So because we had the hypothesis that since the cows, they're eating more or less the same thing, or they are on the same farm, we're expecting the pH to be more or less the same, but it's really crazy heterogeneous.
Yeah.
We have some farms where actually you have cows that are near, almost most of the time they are under the famous cutoff of 6. Some of them on the same farm are just way higher. So there's quite an amazing heterogeneity at the cow level. We were really expecting something really more tight, but no, it's all over the place. You see a lot of heterogeneity even at the herd level.
Sure.
So quite interesting.
I think that's an important detail to there's a couple of things as you guys were talking that was running through my mind. First and foremost, guys, these are two scientists that understand the biology, they understand the computer science of machine learning, and they're trying to create a tool that's available that turns this data into something tangible that we can make a management decision off of. But that's hard. Right? Controlling biological systems, as you know, when you walk out to the barn, every single individual cow is uniquely different. There's just no way that we can minimize and put her in a box to make all of the cows the same. If it were that easy, everyone could do it. right? And so something that researchers are striving off of to better understand this, SARA. And the first phase of this project was kind of what we've been focused in on thus far. But let's focus in a little on the second phase, where you utilize these statistical analyses and applied them to a much larger data set from thousands of farms and tried to make some estimations about subacute ruminal acidosis. So tell me about the prevalence of SARA in the commercial Canadian herd.
Okay, so I think first I think and foremost I should say something about, like, it's a really nice introduction you said, because it's really quite heterogeneous, SARA and everything. So we were trying to build this tool to detect SARA at the individual cow level, so we can say, well, this cow has SARA and this cow doesn't have SARA. So we tried that really hard, and the performance we were getting there is not so high, right? We really like close to 60% good at this, meaning that 40% of the time we will get it wrong, right, with the tool.
Right.
So from one individual milk sample, it's really hard, actually. SARA is really hard to predict from one individual milk sample. This is challenging.
Yeah.
But what we notice is that getting the prevalence at the herd level. So for example, if you run multiple milk samples from multiple cows from the same herd, then you can get a good estimation of the prevalence. Okay, so
within the herd.
Within the herd. So at the individual cow level, it's quite challenging. But this has been shown, like, in the research community, by maybe you don't have something that works well at the individual cow level, but if you got the herd level, then you can get somehow an idea if there is more SARA or not on that herd. And this, in our work, we've shown that it worked pretty well. So that's the basis of, since we have this information, we say, well, we feel confident to be able to launch this tool over the entire database of Lactanet. So that's the cool thing about the minute you have the machine learning model, so the black box we're using to predict SARA, the minute you have it, you can launch this thing over the entire historical records you have, because that's an equation that could be applied on all your samples, your previously acquired samples. So that's kind of the cool thing about building up tools like this, is that you can look back in the dataset and just study the link between
trends.
Yeah. So prevalence at their level, we're pretty confident we get it more or less accurately. And then to answer your question, is like, if we look on Quebec herds, and we looked at 3,000 commercial herds in Quebec, and the prevalence we see, and it's a prevalence which is estimated the season level, but it's close to 6.6%.
Wow.
6.6%, that's the mean, actually. Yeah. And we see some range. It goes from like 0 to the max we got from like this tool is like close to 40%. So some herds, there's not so much, right? Some of them, but some of them still reach like 40% of the animal at a given season have SARA. So that's more or less the estimation we have.
That would certainly be a limitation to the herd if they have that level of prevalence. So as you were analyzing this data, what were some of those factors that for increased prevalence of SARA?
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you. So we have to say that since we launched the model on 3,000 farms, we had to limit ourselves to the information about the herds that we have from the DHI laboratory. So we didn't have access to nutritional information. So obviously there would be something in the nutritional side of things, but
for sure.
So from our side, we only had access to the information from the DHI lab. So we identified some potential factors that could increase or be associated to an increased SARA prevalence. So the first one, which is quite interesting, I think, is that the farms with an automatic milking system were associated with an increased SARA prevalence. And then we saw an effect of the herd size. So farms with less cows, so the small farms were having higher SARA prevalence, as well as a seasonal effect. We saw during fall, the farms had a higher SARA prevalence. And finally, we made the association with milk yield and milk fat yield. So farms that were producing more milk were associated with higher SARA prevalence, and farms that were having a higher milk fat yield were associated to lower SARA prevalence. So that's pretty much portrait of the thing.
Let's kind of take it one by one. What's happening there, do you think, at the robot herd? And I know the data, you don't have the nutritional data in this particular data set, but just historically, what causes SARA that could be increased in your robotic herds?
So SARA is caused because there's an accumulation of volatile fatty acid in the rumen, and that is happening because there's a large amount of concentrates in the diets of the animals. So we think that cows in milking robot farms are having a lot of concentrates separate from the fiber, so that it's not a total mixed ration, but a partial mixed ration. So cows go in the robot and then have their concentrate there, and that will shift the overall diet particle size, and maybe those cows will consume less fiber ultimately. So that may be a hypothesis that I think should be
Explored.
verified in experimental settings.
For sure. Back in the day, we would see increased prevalence of SARA in component-based herds, where if they're feeding slugs of grain at the AM and the PM milking through the parlor, and then setting out a bale or rotationally grazing, those herds were seemingly more prevalent to have subacute ruminal acidosis because of those slugs. Let's look again on the seasonal effect and talk a little bit about that seasonality in the data set.
Yeah, so the major seasonal effect that we observed was in falls. We saw that herds had higher SARA prevalence in fall, and the story behind it and our hypothesis is that here in Quebec, and maybe it's the same thing in the US, during fall we harvest new silage, corn silage, and that leads to instability in the diet of the animals, which could in turn alters the ruminal environment, since cows has to be adapted to new diets, new forage. So that is our hypothesis, that when we changes the forage that we harvest during fall, that may impact ruminal
Oh, for
health.
sure. Yes. Could you talk a little bit about how SARA could be impacting that higher milk volume that you saw in your data set?
We should start to say that it may not be a cause of effect impact, but if we saw that herds with higher milk yield are associated with higher SARA prevalence, that may be linked to the fact that higher producing cows receive higher fermentable diets, higher amount of concentrate.
Very good. If there was one take-home message that you'd really like boots on the ground dairymen to know about your research project, what would that be?
Well, actually, that's really interesting question. First thing is, we were asking this question: is it possible to predict SARA from the individual cow level from one milk sample? I think the answer is it's challenging. So but we have now a huge tool has been built that we can actually use, but at the herd level. And we really like into actually using this tool and putting this tool forward actually here in Quebec to see how this could help people just actually monitor at least the prevalence of SARA on their dairy herd and see how it fluctuates over time, and just to be able to monitor more closely what's going on. So we're in the verge of using this with producer in Quebec, but see if people in the United States are interested to just join this venture just to see if that could help herds in the US as well. That could be really interesting. But looking forward, we really want to just see how this tool could be used by producer just to see if there is some actually management decision that are taken, or new
Sure.
feed supply that are inducing maybe some change in their prevalence of SARA. So we're just really interested to see how this could be helpful in the producer, but we're happy that we were able to define this tool using machine learning and a couple of technologies just to be able to have a tool that could have an impact in the field. So it's more or less what we want to put forward here. But if there is anyone interested in the United States, just reach out and we'll be happy to see if there's a way to just use this tool as well in the United States. That would be amazing. But the tool is available, and we're just seeing how it could be used on farm to help producers manage SARA.
That sounds fantastic. And I bet there could be, you know, as I was reading this article, the thing that just kept running through my head is I know we can't do individual cows, but in my mind, those herds that are on DHI, I could see maybe them generating a report potentially that's by group that the dairyman would then share with his nutritionist. And we could look at themes or trends over time. We can learn from that data and make some management decisions off of those trends. And so, yeah, like you were saying, definitely not something that we can use on individual cows, but still a fantastic tool and resource. Well, guys, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you for your time, and listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day today to learn how these researchers are working with machine learning to create a tool that will alert you to subacute ruminal acidosis in your herd. I've really enjoyed our conversation. This has been the July edition of the Dairy Science Digest, which is a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. We highlight peer-reviewed research articles that are actively in press because it's sound science that you can base your management decisions around, and it's provided to you by your University of Missouri Dairy team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This is Reagan Bluel with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great day.